Well, hello. So, welcome to this little experiment we're calling mini music lessons with Alexis. Just a note before we get started, um, the purpose of these videos is to help with particularly the members of our choir who don't necessarily read music. So I am going to be starting at pretty rudimentary level. I hope that even some of our more experienced musicians can find some helpfulness with these videos as well. But know that we're starting from the ground up. We'll be talking about uh, score navigation to start. And for our new folks, for those of you out there who don't read music at all, I'm going to try and condense a lot of this. So you're going to see a lot of stuff, but I'm going to really try to keep it in the realm of score navigation today. I know there's probably going to be a billion other questions about a lot of the stuff that we'll see, but I just wanted to start with score navigation because I think that can be sometimes the most intimidating part of joining a choir for the first time. It's just where do I look? Where am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to sing? Where are we starting? Right? And just getting a lay of the land, I think, is one of the most useful things you can do to start. So try not to feel too overwhelmed by all the information. You can always go back or pause or take whatever notes are helpful to you. And then, of course, if you ever have any questions or if something that I've explained isn't terribly clear, you're always welcome to reach out and ask me any of those questions. I'll try to help as best I can. Um, I have also probably should have a little disclaimer here. My first music degree is in composition and music theory, so this kind of stuff I really super nerd out about. Music notation, all that kind of stuff is totally my jam. So if I'm being a super nerd, please forgive me. So score navigation, of course, like I said, is very important. It's the lay of the land. It's how we navigate where we're supposed to sing. It's very easy to get lost in all the little black dots. I thought it might be helpful to use carols of Christmas as a reference, but I'll be using some other examples as well. So the first question I think that we can ask is where to start. I typically like a top down approach when it comes to score navigation. So you might hear me say the phrase, all right, choir, let's start to sing on page 7, third system, measure 24, third beat. And that phrase may sound like a crazy jumbled mess to you right now, but we're going to break it down. So, of course, pretty straightforward. The first thing is pages, right? We have multiple pages of music. The page number is usually always in the top right or left corner. Okay, so if I said, what did I say, page 7? Page 7, second system, right? So that's where we start. We start at the top. Which page? The next term is the term system. System is a line of music. And by line of music, we mean a staff line. So you can see here in this piece, um, each different system is indicated by a different color. So green is the first system of the piece, red is the second, and so on and so forth, for a total of 5 systems on this page. And depending on whether this is specifically a piano score, but depending on what instruments are involved, they'll usually be bracketed together in some way by either a bracket or a brace. But either way, this line right here, the straight line, that's going to connect all the instruments that are involved in a line of music. For our rehearsal purposes, I might say we're going to go start at system 4. We're going to start at the fourth system, and that would be blue right here. Or I might say we're actually going to start on the second system of the page, and that would be red right here. So heading back to Carols of Christmas, you can see here on page 7 we have 3 systems of music. So how do I know that? How do I see that? So again, a system is connected by this line, this straight line right here. So we have one vocal line here, we have another vocal line here, And then these two lines are the piano part. Okay, and all three instruments or parts are connected by this line. So this right here is a system, one system of music. And then there's a space, and then we have another line here connecting, so another line of music. So this would be the second system. Okay, and then same thing down here. We have a straight line connecting, bracketing this all together, and this would be the third system of music. So zooming in a little bit here, there are a couple more terms that we need to understand. And the first is a measure. And you can see we have here an example of two measures. The literal definition of a measure is a unit of time within a piece of music. Each measure has a consistent length of time based on the piece's time signature, which we'll talk about in a minute, and is defined by a certain number of beats. Uh, Measures are broken up on sheet music by this right here, which we call a bar line. I'm not sure why line is missing, but we typically refer to these as a bar line. And there are different types of bar lines, but we can get to that at a different music lesson. Just know for now, the way that we split up measures is with a bar line. Sometimes you may hear measures referred to as bars. This is just these terms are synonymous. Again, this should definitely say bar line because that's kind of confusing this a little bit. But measure and bar mean the same thing. So you may sometimes hear me say bar 3 or bar 4 or measure 1 or measure 7. But those mean the same thing. So the next thing I think we need to understand is time signature, and I don't want to delve too deeply into time signature because this could be a whole lesson in and of itself. And it's two numbers, one on top of the other. You might see 4/4, you might see 6/8, you might see 2/4 or 3/4, you might see 12/8. There's a bunch of different types of time signatures, but it's basically telling us how many beats are in a measure and what value or what length each of those beats are. And so, of course, the most simple example to start is a 4/4 time signature. So, what this is telling us is that there are four quarter notes, or the equivalent of four quarter notes, in every single measure. And again, I wouldn't overthink that at this point. We'll do another mini lesson that delves really deeply into time signature. But hopefully that's just a good introduction to at least help us out with score navigation. Again, it's really up to the composers and editors to worry about making sure that there's the right number of beats in every measure. So use the bar line as a better reference point to delineate separate measures. But hopefully that's a good start for that. So one thing I should note here, and a question that I often get from choristers, is where we find measure numbers. And unfortunately, every editor is different. So, although it's very rare, sometimes you will find a choral score where every single measure is numbered individually. Sometimes choristers will actually take the time to do that themselves, and some people find that very helpful, but certainly are not expected or required to do that. More typically, we at the very least will be given a measure number at the beginning of each system, and you can see that here in Carols of Christmas. So this is saying it's measure 5, so that means this would be measure 6, measure 7, measure 8, measure 9, measure 10, and then measure 11. So at the beginning of every single system. So if I said, okay, page 2, measure 22 is where we're going to start, you would have to say, okay, well, here's either 19 and then count to 22, or okay, if this is measure 23, then the one before it is 22. All right. And so, like I said, some folks like to write in all their measure numbers, and you're perfectly welcome to do that. It can speed things up a bit for you, but certainly not required. Sometimes in scores, and this is in a couple of the pieces that we have this semester, sometimes the editors will hide the measure number at the beginning of every system, but put it under the piano part, not above the vocal part. And that often can be missed by singers. So it's the same kind of role. It's at the beginning of every system, but it's sort of hidden there under the vocal part, or excuse me, the piano part. All right, another thing to note is that sometimes you'll see certain sections sectioned off. So you might see a measure number in a bigger font in a big old square. This is just to separate sections of the music and to provide starting points, easy, identifiable starting points. Um, and sometimes, particularly if it's a long piece like Carols of Christmas, you'll have something called rehearsal letters, and that's indicated here. So this is section A, and then section B starts right here. And then section C starts here. Okay, so I use those more rarely. I'll typically use those in larger scores or major works, and usually I get pretty silly about it. I had a director once who would choose a theme. So he would, let's say the theme was zoo animals. So he might say, okay, we're going to start at letter bobcat, or we're going to start at letter alligator, just to keep things fun. But again, these rehearsal markers or these rehearsal letters are just resources for the conductors to try and get you to different sections more quickly. So, our next two terms you'll hear me use quite frequently, and they're very important when it comes to score navigation. And that's these two words here, pickup and downbeat. So, we're zooming in even further. We've gone from a page to a system to a measure. Now we're starting to talk about specific beats of a measure. We'll start with the downbeat. Downbeat is always the first beat of a measure. So if I say we're going to start on the downbeat of measure 7, that just means we're going to start on the first beat of that measure. The reason it's called the downbeat, or at least this is my understanding anyway, is you'll notice when I conduct that my arms actually always go down on the downbeat. So it's actually also a really good reference point if we're singing or in performance. If you ever get disoriented or a little lost, just watch for my hands to go in a downward direction, and that's showing you where the first beat of a measure is visually. So if you hear me say downbeat, just means first beat of the measure. Down. Okay. The next term is a little bit trickier to understand. The pickup, another word for pickup is anacrusis. You probably won't hear me use that word very frequently. I usually just use pickup, but you might hear other directors say anacrusis. But I might say a phrase like, we're going to start on the pickup to measure 7. So in this example, this is the Beatles in a Yellow Submarine. So I'm sure many of you probably recognize this melody or this line of text. But what the pickup refers to is the beat leading into another measure. So it's often the last beat or couple of notes leading into the downbeat. So if I say, for example, let's just pretend that this right here, Man Who Sailed, was measure 7. I might say, all right, we're going to start on the downbeat of measure 7, which would mean we're going to start right here on the first beat. Man, right? But this has a little bit of a pickup. It has something kind of connected to it in the very last bit of the previous measure. So I might say something instead like let's start on the pickup to measure 7. So that would mean that we're going to start with whatever note or notes are here right before leading up to the downbeat, right? So instead of starting right on the downbeat or the first beat of measure 7, I might say, let's start on the pickup to measure 7. So live de mer, right? So those are those two terms. So back to carols of Christmas. If we go to page 7, or if I say, hey choir, turn to page 7, let's say I wanted to start on this note right here. I might say one of two things, because this is the pickup to this measure down here. I might say, choir, we're going to start page 7, pick up to the second system, or I might say, pick up to measure 86. Okay? So just a quick review. We always work the top down. So we always start with the page number. All right. So for example, page 3 right here. Then we say which system. So either on this page we have 2, right? Because here's a line connecting all these and here's a line connecting all of these. So first system, second system. Okay. So page number, system, and then I'm going to indicate the measure. So I might say page 3, second system, measure 31, and I might say we're going to start right on the downbeat, or I might say we're going to do the pickup to measure fill in the blank. Okay, and I'll narrow it down to the beat. So the next thing that we should probably talk about is which part is yours, right? There's a lot of stuff typically happening on a choral score, and we need to make sure we understand which line we're supposed to be looking at. So we talked about this a little bit before. Usually the vocal part sits above the piano part. Um, Typically, in a score, at the very beginning of a piece, there will be notes here indicating what instrument is what. So you'll see here we start with a chime solo in the first system. And then here the chimes continue. They don't label it again. It's just from there on out you kind of assume that it's the chimes until we see another label. Okay, so the chimes and the piano play here in the second system, and then the choir comes in. So we have these letters here to indicate this is the soprano part on top, and alto, and then the tenors read here, and the basses read here. Now you'll note when we go to the next page, that again, those labels go away because they assume that once they've given them to you, they don't need to write them again unless something changes. And that's pretty standard throughout all choral scores. Now, where that might change, and a really great example in this piece, is when we get further into the score and things start to change a little bit. For example, right here, they combine the voices. And so they'll write a note to make sure you understand that this is everybody. All right, that we're all singing together here. Or, yep, see, here's another example. They'll specify. Next time it changes drastically, at least in this example of Carols of Christmas, is on page 19. So before, the choir is in this more condensed version, right? The sopranos and the altos are reading the top line, and the tenors and basses are reading the bottom, just like it was indicated at the very start of the piece. Now, this can change once things start to get a little more involved and you can't all neatly fit it into this kind of condensed style. So you'll usually see these little arrows which tell you, all right, the lines of music are going to spread out a little bit. And wouldn't you know, here are the labels back again because it's something different. Okay, so now that everything's split, we have sopranos on this top line, altos on this line, tenor, and then bass. Okay, typically they will then use the arrows. You see them here at page 20 when it's going back to how it was before, and they'll relabel them here. Okay, so just always look out for these arrows. If they're pointing like that means, oh, it's going to get spread out. If they're pointing this direction, it's saying, all right, we're going to condense it again. Save some paper. Okay? Related to this is an interesting note about text. And this can get a little tricky at times, and a lot of different editors will approach this in various ways. But typically, when you have the choir condensed like this, we'll just have a line of text in the middle that's for all four parts. Okay? Where we start to see things differently, because sometimes text can be above your music notes, sometimes text can be below your music notes. Um, where we might see that start to come to play, and you can see it already here, is when the parts start doing some things differently or independently. So in this line, for example, the sopranos and altos say, "Swift are winging, angels singing." But the tenors and basses say, "Swift are winging, winging, angels singing." So once the text is different between the parts, they'll start separating it this way. Okay? And then similarly here, when all four parts go independent, um, you would follow the text that's just below your music notes. Okay, so then tenors and basses, once the music is then condensed, it'll go back to above your music notes. Okay? And same thing here for the final amen. All right, so I hope that is a good introduction for score navigation. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we'll come back with another music lesson to dive a bit more deeply into some of these terms that we discovered today. But for now, hopefully that will help with navigating your score. All right, thanks. Bye.